Good morning to you all, and a very warm welcome to Shabbat at the house. My name is Natalie Kendel, and I will be your host for today. In case you're new here, you've joined us on the official YouTube channel of The House. The House is a house church where we get together on Saturdays to share stories, music, and more for an event called Shabbat at the House. You can join us live or enjoy the recordings of these here on our channel. Today is the first time we are together since the new year began, and this year, the Festival of Purim falls on the 6th to the 7th of March. In that connection, we will today be exploring the story of Esther. That and more coming up. Sometimes here at the house, we share recommendations ranging from books to projects to YouTubers that are well worth checking out. And our recommendation today is of a film called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. This is an animated short film which was released this past December on the BBC. It is based on an illustrated novel by a man called Charlie Mackesy and tells the story of four unlikely friends. If you're looking for a truly beautiful and wholesome experience, both visually and conceptually, we highly recommend watching this film. It is appropriate for both children and adult audiences. And if you're unsure of where you can view this film, feel free to message us on our Facebook or Instagram account, and we'll be able to point you in the right direction.
The Lord, He is faithful beyond what I feel. Though sureness may falter, His sure love
Jesus, we ask that our time together today will be meaningful. Let some of the words or the music or even the quiet shared here fill some need, some want that has been gnawing at our existence, at our minds. We need hope, to have a hope that anchors us once more, that helps us to take another step or breathe a bit easier or feel a bit of that weight lifted off our shoulders. Please restore hope to those who need it today. Inspire those who only have sparks of it to see that flame grow. Assure each person here that they have a place at your table, that they are welcome wherever they are, and that your commitment to helping us is undying and unwavering. Let us now share in a moment of quiet together, where those who would like to can talk to God about whatever is on their mind. Thank you for sharing in the silence and for your honesty. We sometimes share a segment here at the house called How to Be Image Bearers. During this, we look at many and diverse examples that people can live out God's love in the world around them. And today's example is taken from a story shared in the New York Post. It's the story of 7 Chinese friends who together buy a house where they can grow old together. 7 women, all of whom are unmarried or widowed, had been friends for over 20 years. And they had the brilliant idea of, instead of living their lives apart, growing old in retirement homes or isolation, they would invest in growing old together. These 7 friends bought a house in the countryside, and here they spend their days in community together, pursuing hobbies, resting, learning, building relationships. Each of the women have different skills which they share with each other. Some love to cook, others to garden, some paint, others are musically gifted. As they grow older, they look out for each other and take care of each other. And together, they're rethinking what things like family, community, old age, property owning, and connection can look like if we dare to think outside some of the rigid boxes which were offered. May we be inspired by this loving example. Let us sing together, We Open Our Bibles Again, and then we'll jump straight into our story for the day.
From Eden to Eden.
Our story today is found in the book of Esther. Let us begin reading together from chapter 1. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days, in the enclosed garden of the king's palace, for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. So, here we have the introduction to our story. This event is set in Persia, or modern-day Iran, and we are introduced to our first character, King Xerxes. At this point, in 479 BC, Xerxes is the ruler of a vast empire, stretching, as we're told, all the way from India to Kush, which is the Upper Nile region. And in this, his 3rd year of reigning, he hosts a great celebration. For 180 days, he puts on display his vast wealth. That's 6 months. He parades and shows off his treasure and power in front of all the people and all the military leaders and princes and nobles of every one of his 127 provinces. And at the end of this display, he throws a grand banquet. It lasts 7 days, and we're told in some detail here of the liberal lavishness of this banquet. From the grandiose decorations in gold, silver, pearl, the great wealth showed by the king, and the unending flow of wine. Let's continue reading in verse 9. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. So on the last day of this great extravagant banquet, after 7 days of unending drinking, the king sends for his queen. He has just spent 6 months displaying his material wealth. Now he says to his wife, "Come and parade before the people and all my nobles, that I may show off your beauty." Meaning that to him, Queen Vashti is just another ornament in his vast collection. As he paraded his gold, silver, and marble, now she was to be shown off too. "Look, everyone, at this beautiful thing belonging to me, this beautiful thing I own and can boast about." But we're told that Queen Vashti refuses. She refuses to be paraded before the drunken, hungry eyes of the court, or to be treated as a show pony. And at this refusal, the king becomes furious and burns with anger. Well, something must be done. The queen has just refused the king's command. Xerxes gathers the 7 nobles of the Persian Media Empire, his closest advisors, and says, "According to law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her." Then Memucan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, "Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, 'King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come.' This very day the Persian and Median women of the nobility, who have heard about the queen's conduct, will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord." So one of the noblemen says to the king, "The queen has publicly disobeyed you." He claims that Vashti has not only slighted the king, but also the noblemen by not parading in front of them. And then he concludes, this will set a bad example for all the other women. Soon they will start to despise their own husbands and not do whatever they're told to do. Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. In other words, our wives may be inspired by Vashti's actions and start to become problematic to all of us husbands. We'll have an uprising on our hands with all these women. They can't just be allowed to disobey or refuse their husbands. Where will it end? And so it is decided that Queen Vashti is to never be allowed into the presence of the king again. She is, in essence, a banished, removed wife. And the nobleman adds, "Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she." Verse 21. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household. The king's command, which he sends to every corner of his empire, is that each man must dominate and keep control of his own household to be superior over his wife and women of his house. And if anyone gets any ideas about women not obeying their husbands, see what the king himself is willing to do to his own wife, the very queen. Later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, "Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women into the harem at the citadel of Susa." This echoes the suggestion made by the nobleman in chapter 1 that once Queen Vashti is removed, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Let them, that is the beautiful young virgins, be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. So, here we have the introduction to our story and the beginning of the book of Esther, the banishment of a previous queen and the search for a new one. The king appoints commissioners all over his empire to gather beautiful, young, unmarried women. Of these, one will be chosen to become his new queen. And it is at this point that we're introduced to our main character, a woman named Esther. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. So in this capital city of Persia and Media, there is a man named Mordecai. We're told he has a younger cousin, who in Hebrew is called Hadassah, also called Esther. Esther's parents died when she was young, so she was orphaned, but Mordecai adopted her. And she is now directly impacted by King Xerxes' command, because as we're told in verse 7, she had a lovely figure and was beautiful. And being unmarried, she is spotted by the king's scouts and taken to be part of the harem at Susa. And just so we're all on the same page, a harem referred to a group of women who, in this case, belonged to the king. In some cases, they might function as wives, concubines, or female attendants. Now, Esther is taken to be part of this harem, which is overseen by the eunuch called Haggai, and verse 9 tells us, "She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace, and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem." Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. So Esther is quickly favored above the other women, given servants, beauty treatments, and fed special food. Mordecai does his best to check on her, but also says she must keep the fact that she's a Jew secret. At this point in the story, we are not explicitly told the reason for this secrecy, but we might surmise that people knowing Esther was Jewish was in some way a threat or a risk to her and or others. Verse 12. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. So Esther is crowned queen. She takes the place that was once Vashti's, but she continues to keep the fact that she is a Jew secret. The story goes on. In chapter 3, the highest honored of the king's noblemen, a man named Haman, feels slighted by Mordecai because Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Being enraged at this, the text says, "Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he," that is Haman, "scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes." Haman doesn't only want Mordecai to be punished, but his entire people wiped out. And he comes before the king saying, "There is a certain people, dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from all those of other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." In essence, Haman is willing to pay a fortune to see the Jews wiped out. The king replies, "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." Xerxes agrees to this and makes it a royal decree. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now word reaches Esther that Mordecai is mourning and clearly in distress, and she is informed of the royal decree. Mordecai sends a message to her explaining the great disaster that is about to crash over their people, and he says these words, "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Mordecai is making the point to his young cousin that she is in a unique position to do something. She is the queen, wife of the king of the empire. If anyone might have an influence, if anyone might have the ear of the king, it would be her. Esther sends a message back to Mordecai saying, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the royal scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." Esther knows very well what happens to people who try to approach, to speak to the king without being invited to do so. And of course she, along with the rest of the kingdom, knows what happens to queens who displease King Xerxes. This decree, to kill all the Jews in a single day, has been approved by the king, declared as the king's command to all the provinces. It's common knowledge and sealed with the king's ring. That means that if Esther asks him not to kill the Jews, she is directly expressing disagreement with his command. asking the king to bend to her wishes and change his mind. And again, as we know, this has not gone well in the past. This is what Esther does. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." King Xerxes truly is taken with Esther. In front of his own court, not only does he accept her unprompted approach, but he promises her whatever her request is, up till half the kingdom. "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." The queen throws Haman and Xerxes a banquet, and at the end of it invites them to yet another the next day. She says she will make her request of the king then. Now, Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. Well, of course he did. He has just had the honor of dining with the king and queen, and been invited back the next day for a second time, an immense honor. The next day, so the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition, and spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman." The story concludes with that the king reverses his original decree. The Jews across his kingdom are not destroyed. Haman is punished, Mordecai honored, and Queen Esther, having acted to save her people from annihilation, remains queen and highly favored by the king. Now, the story of Esther is, to many who have grown up reading the Bible, a very familiar one. Esther is the character featured in many children's Bible coloring books, with flowing hair and great beauty. This heroic queen presented as an example to other young girls and women of what great courage can look like. Her story told and retold on the big screen in movies like One Night with the King and The Girl Who Became Queen. And in many ways, the retelling of this story has taken on a shape similar to that of a fairy tale, a bit of a Cinderella story, from rags to riches. A commoner plucked from obscurity, chosen for her beauty, picked by the king himself over all the other women, and made queen. Hollywood itself couldn't come up with a more compelling plot. It even has the staple makeover montage in rom-coms. Given beauty treatments and special food, 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. Taken to live in a palace, given the finest clothes, power, influence, finery, attending banquets and balls, admired by all. And so, at first glance, the story of Esther may seem like an absolute dream, the formula of any well-liked rom-com. And to top it all off, the great courage Esther shows, we like to sum up in Mordecai's well-known words, "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" This phrase, "for such a time as this," has been used and reused by Christians to express ideas of purpose in their own lives, to symbolize courage and God's will and calling. It's the words printed and framed over the cots of baby girls, featured in wall decals and in worship songs, motivational posters, highlighted in personal Bibles, and used as mantras when life seems messy or directionless. Because these words, "for such a time as this," carries with it a sense of destiny or of being part of God's plan, of intentional living, of being at the right place at the right time. But we're going to take a second look at the story of Esther, at what actually happened. Beginning with the context of this story, what is the context of the narrative of Esther? Well, the context is the Babylonian exile of Judah. In short, the people of Judah, while living in their homeland, became so corrupt, so violent, being described as doing more evil than all the other surrounding nations, that God has to step in to stop them before they completely destroy themselves. He impedes their self-destruction by using a foreign ruler, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to overthrow Judah, its capital city of Jerusalem, and take captive the Judeans, otherwise known as the Jews, to Babylon. This event is called the Babylonian exile, or simply the exile. The exile was prophesied and was announced that this would happen decades before the actual fall of Jerusalem. But God promised through his prophets that there was hope, that the people will return once more, leaving Babylon and returning to their homeland. He announces this to his people through his prophet Jeremiah. This is what the Lord says: "When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have driven you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile." This was the great hope for the exiled Jews, that their exile isn't permanent. They are going to return to their home. God will bring restoration to them. And as he said, "My plans for you are to prosper, not to harm. Plans to give you hope and a future." These were words that the exiles in Babylon clung to. It was the hope which anchored them. This won't last forever. Soon we can return. When? In 70 years. Now, the exiles did return, as promised, beginning in 538 BC, when a new ruler called Cyrus the Great gives the Jews permission to return home again. Okay, but how does this relate to Esther? Well, first of all, Mordecai and Esther are living in what was called Babylon, only the Babylonian Empire was overthrown by another, one called Persia and Media. But the land of Persia, as we said, which is modern-day Iran, is the same as Babylon. which helps answer our next question. What are Mordecai and Esther, two Jews, doing living in the city of Susa, capital of Persia, or in the land which was known as Babylon? Well, they are descendants of the exiles from Judah, taken there in captivity. That answers the where of our story's context. But let us now consider the when. The events of the book of Esther take place between circa 483 BC and 473 BC. But we just said that the Jewish captivity officially ended in 538 BC. That's 55 years ago when the story of Esther begins. Even the Temple of Jerusalem, which was destroyed, has been rebuilt, completed in 516 BC. So what are Mordecai and Esther still doing in Persia? Why haven't they returned home? Why are these two Jews still there? On the one hand, it is understandable that not every Jewish person could make the over 900-mile journey back to Judah. Some would be old, some too frail to travel that far, but Mordecai and Esther don't seem to qualify for these reasons. The truth was that many Jews refused to return to Judah. They didn't wish to move because they'd become comfortable in Babylon. They'd been born in Babylon, that was what was familiar to them, where they'd built a life and settled in. Of course, in the book of Esther, we're told that Mordecai and Esther weren't the only ones to not return. There were still many Jews living in Persia, many who didn't leave. And the simple truth is, they are in the wrong place. They are living in disobedience to God. In Jeremiah 29, when God talks about the plans I have for you, Mordecai and Esther are living outside those plans, not living a part of the plans God had for all his people. Secondly, it may be argued Mordecai and Esther are not necessarily living as proudly, openly Jews in another land. There is secrecy applied to their heritage. Esther goes by Esther, in Old Persian meaning star, aligning the name to the Near Eastern goddess Ishtar, instead of using Hadassah, which was her Hebrew name. And Mordecai tells Esther not to reveal that she is a Jew. It wasn't known to everyone that Mordecai was a Jew either, exemplified by the fact that Haman had to be told by others that he was a Jew. This means that the way both Mordecai and Esther lived could not have been in pure alignment with the laws of Moses. Because if they were refusing to eat unclean food, touch ceremonially unclean people, be under the roof of Gentiles, observe the Sabbath, the laws of Jubilee, the festivals given to Israel by God, all these things would stand out like a sore thumb. It would be noticeable, disruptive. And though we read reference of other Jews in the kingdom described by Haman as people who keep themselves separate, their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws, it would seem that Mordecai and Esther are not necessarily doing this at all. And so in addition to refusing to leave Babylon, they are not practicing their faith as a law-abiding Jew would, but submitting to and practicing the customs and way of life of the Persian Empire. Which leads us to the third point, Esther being part of a harem. Now, the way the selection of a new queen for King Xerxes works in this story isn't that all the prettiest women in the kingdom were lined up and he just picked one out of the line. Nor was it a case of him going on dates with each of these women, going for strolls in the park and getting to know them, asking what their favorite color is or what their political views are, how many children they might like to have. And this was not a case of waiting until marriage either. As we're told in chapter 2, the women, who it was stipulated had to be virgins, would spend a year going through these beauty treatments, and then each in turn would be called over to the king's palace, spend the night with the king, and then be returned to the harem in the morning. If the king liked the woman, she might be invited to return to the palace, but if he didn't, she would not be invited back. In the same way, Esther goes through the beauty treatments, waits her turn, and spends the night with the king. Again, this is not how law-abiding Jews would go about entering into a marriage. They wouldn't have sex with women in a harem as though sampling shoes in the store and then pick their favorite. Nor would a Jewish woman who was considered honorable have sex before marriage. So, what is Esther doing here? Now, on the one hand, it's worth highlighting that it's not like these women volunteered. This isn't like the show The Bachelor, where a group of women are trying to win the affections of one man. They were each taken from their homes and made to be a part of the king's harem. So Esther wasn't signing up for this. But on the other hand, we might compare her with the previous queen, Queen Vashti. Vashti, who refused to be objectified and paraded like a prize pony in front of the king and his drunk revelers, she didn't know for sure how the king would react to her disobedience. When she made her decision, she was risking her life. She would have known well that execution might be the cost of her choice. Her refusal might get her killed. The most exemplary and brave woman in this story is Queen Vashti. Imagine how much fortitude, dignity, and sense of self-worth it would have taken to publicly defy the command of a king, an inebriated king, in a place and time where obedience to one's husband, to men, and above all, to the monarch, would be absolute law. And here we have this remarkable woman going against the norm and what is expected of her as a woman. What she does is, in fact, so drastic and revolutionary that, as we read, the king's officials are deeply worried it will inspire similar behavior in their wives. They are so worried about this that they urge Xerxes to send out an edict in every language to every part of his empire, stating that every man should be the ruler of his own household. That's how much Vashti's act frightened them, threatened them. At the same time, we must concede that many of Esther's choices likely kept her alive. We do things which are less than ideal out of self-preservation. The point here is simply Queen Vashti is a real hero in this narrative, lest we forget. Esther submits to a system which is both oppressive and goes against the laws and customs of her people. And we can't get around the fact that Mordecai and Esther's predicament, the fact that Esther has to submit to a foreign king's wishes, and that they and their people's lives are in danger, wouldn't have happened if they had returned home. So if we sum up where Esther is, she's in a land where she shouldn't be, in a harem where she shouldn't be, living in a secrecy she shouldn't be, entering into a marriage in a way she shouldn't be. Mordecai may have phrased Esther's position as being for such a time as this, but they wouldn't be in danger if they weren't in such a place as that. He described Esther's position as being providential and planned, but the truth is they wouldn't be in their position if they'd obeyed God. Esther may have helped her people for such a time as this, but they weren't meant to be in such a place as that. There are occasions on which we take stock of our lives. For some, it may be during New Year's, as we consider what we'd like the new year to have in store for us. Some of us have goals and dreams, what we'd like to achieve, where we'd like to be, what sort of people we'd like to be. And for some of us, we realize we're not where we want to be in life, or perhaps even where we're meant to be. Perhaps we're in a wrong relationship. Perhaps we feel like we're behind in life compared to everyone else. Maybe we've made some really bad decisions. Maybe we're struggling to break a pattern or a habit and we feel stuck. Maybe we've disappointed ourselves. Maybe we've just messed up so many times and we feel like we're outside God's plans for our lives. A striking fact about this story is that God is not mentioned a single time in the whole book of Esther. It can in fact seem as though he's absent from the entire story. A big gaping hole, a literary choice to perhaps make a point about this narrative. And perhaps you feel like he's absent from your story or the plans for your lives as well. But Esther, who, yes, was in the wrong place, in the wrong setting, under the wrong terms, did something very right. Through her, God did rescue many people. She did show bravery, and her actions did have massive ripple effects. The twist in the story of Esther doesn't lie in ignoring the fact that she was in the wrong place, but rather in realizing that God was willing to help in a story in which he's not even mentioned, and brings good things into a self-inflicted disaster. In the story of Esther, God is powerful in the face of our ineptitude, patient in the shadow of our disobedience, compassionate in the middle of our mistakes. He is humble enough to enter our less than ideal situations, to be there in such places too. Even if you're not where is ideal right now, even if you're struggling or drifting, even if you feel like your whole life is off track, late, sidelined, or you're just a complete mess, those good plans God talked about can still reach you. He is in the business of making new plans when plan A fails. And for all those who say, as they look at their lives, I'm not where I'm meant to be, God replies, my goodness is still with you, even in such a place as this. As we consider these things, let us sing together Plans, which is based on Jeremiah 29:11-14.
This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, I will not forget, and I fulfill my promise.
May the Lord of our hope be with you wherever you are, and assure you of his good plans, beginning now and until their full fruition. Thank you all so much for joining us here at the house today. See you next time.